Hello everyone, nice to see you again on my channel. You know, sometimes the most powerful truths don't come from textbooks, gurus, or influencers. Sometimes they come from the quiet voice of experience, from someone who's lived long enough to watch the world change more times than most of us can count. And this story, well, it starts in the living room of a small house in a quiet part of town, where a 92-year-old woman sat in a rocking chair by the window, her hands folded over a worn photo album. Her name was Elsie. And let me tell you, when Elsie spoke, you didn't scroll, you didn't multitask, you listened, because there was something about her presence that made time slow down. Something in her voice that carried the weight of decades, of love, loss, choices made, and lessons learned the hard way. I was sitting across from her one afternoon, sipping tea that was just a little too strong, and I asked her, half seriously, half curious, "Elsie, what's something you wish more men knew?" She looked out the window for a long moment. I thought maybe she hadn't heard me. But then she turned to me, her eyes sharp as ever despite her age, and she said, "I wish more men knew that being strong doesn't mean being hard." That line right there hit me, because in one sentence, she'd cracked open a truth that most men never get told. She said, strength is about holding your ground when you need to, but it's also about knowing when to soften, when to bend, when to listen. A man who only knows how to protect, but not how to connect, he'll find himself surrounded by silence in the end. I asked her where she learned that from, and she smiled, a soft, sad smile. "From watching the man I loved," she said. "He was good, solid, provided for us, protected us, but he never really let us see him, not all of him. He thought his silence was strength. He thought emotions were something he had to keep locked away." And then she paused, took a breath. "But the walls he built to keep himself safe, they kept the rest of us out." That's the kind of wisdom that doesn't come from reading 100 books or watching 1,000 videos. That comes from living through it. Elsie told me something else that afternoon. She said most men are never taught how to carry both fire and water in their hands. You have to be on fire when it's time to protect what matters, but you have to be in the water when someone needs to be held, heard, and healed. And I think that's one of the most powerful things any man can learn, not just how to lead, but how to lean in, how to be present. Not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, and soulfully. Elsie said, "The strongest men I've known were the ones who knew how to cry without shame, who knew how to say, 'I was wrong' without losing their pride, who could hold a woman like she was made of glass, but still trust her like she was forged from steel." You see, we live in a world where masculinity often gets mistaken for stoicism without softness. But what if the deepest form of masculinity isn't about being unshaken, but being able to move through every season of life without losing your center? Elsie told me, every man will face moments that break him. The question is, will he allow the break to make him bitter, or will he allow it to make him better? And I could tell she wasn't just talking about men in theory. She was talking about her son, her husband, her brother, men she loved, men who carried pain so quietly it eventually drowned them, because they didn't know how to ask for help. Because no one ever taught them that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's a doorway. She said, "I've outlived most of the men I've ever loved, and the tragedy wasn't that they passed. It's that they passed without ever letting themselves be fully known." That's the kind of thing that sticks with you. And we talked for hours that day. She shared stories about her childhood during the Great Depression, about marrying young, about raising 3 kids on barely anything, about losing one of them far too soon. And in every chapter of her life there was a thread, a lesson that most men never get the chance to hear because they're too busy being told to toughen up, man up, shut up. But Elsie's advice? It wasn't about being less of a man. It was about being more of a whole human being. She said, women don't need perfect men. They need present men. They need men who can sit with discomfort, men who can face failure and not let it define them, men who can say, I'm scared, and still take the next step. There was a fire in her when she spoke about this, like it was something she'd carried her whole life, waiting for someone to ask. And honestly, I couldn't help but think how many young men out there are searching for meaning, for direction, for a sense of who they're supposed to be, when the wisdom they need is sitting in a rocking chair waiting to be asked. Elsie told me one more thing that stuck with me. She said, if a man spends his whole life chasing success, but never learns how to sit still with the people who love him, he'll die rich in things and be poor in love. She looked at my rights in the eyes when she said it. And you know what? That hit harder than any self-help book ever could. After a long pause, she leaned back in her chair, her fingers brushing over that old photo album again. She whispered, you know what else most men don't understand? Time isn't something you manage, it's something you invest in. And too many men spend it like it's endless. I asked her what she meant, and she chuckled softly. When you're young, you think time waits, that you'll have more chances, more moments, more tomorrows. But one day you'll blink and you're 92. You're looking back, not forward. And the only question that matters is, did I give enough of myself to the people who mattered? She said she watched too many men get lost in the pursuit of things, money, status, admiration from people who'd never visit their grave. Meanwhile, the people who needed them most, their wives, their kids, their parents, even their own souls, got leftovers. The time that was left over, the energy that remained after chasing everything else. Elsie was quiet for a while. Then, she said something that caught me off guard. Most men are so afraid of being ordinary that they forget what it means to be present. She explained that love, real love, doesn't come from being impressive. It comes from being there, showing up on the hard days, holding someone through the messy moments, listening when you're tired, saying I love you even when you're angry. Those things don't make you ordinary. They make you extraordinary in a world that forgets what presence feels like. And it wasn't just romantic love she was talking about. She meant all of it. Friendship, family, even the way a man loves himself. She said the men who learned to be gentle with themselves, who gave themselves permission to rest, to reflect, to feel, they were the ones who aged with grace, who died without regret. She looked out the window again, the sunlight touching her face like it had a memory of its own, and she said, you know what made the difference in my life? It wasn't who had the biggest house or the best job. It was who made me laugh when I felt like crying, who remembered the stories I told, who held my hand when I was scared. Then she turned back to me. So tell the men who listen to you this. You don't have to be the loudest in the room. You just have to be real. And if you can be real with the people you love, you've already done something most men never learn to do. That silence after she said that felt holy. I remember asking her, Elsie, if you could speak to every young man in the world, what would you say to him before he turns 30? She didn't hesitate. Learn how to sit with your own pain without passing it on to someone else. I didn't say anything for a long time after that. She said, men who don't deal with their pain create more pain. They carry it into their relationships, into their parenting, into their work. They become sharp without realizing they're cutting everyone around them. But she didn't say it with judgment. She said it with love. She said it like someone who had watched good men destroy good things simply because they were never given permission to heal. She told me, find someone who sees you, not just your ambition, not just your confidence, not just your mask, but you. And when you do, don't hide, don't run, sit with her, let her know you, the real you. That's where real love lives. At one point, I asked her what made her husband so special to her, even after all those years. She smiled and said, "He wasn't perfect, but when he got it wrong, he showed up the next day to try again." That's all I ever needed. Not a man who never failed, but a man who kept showing up. That stuck with me. Because in a world where perfection is idolized, maybe what we need more than anything is persistence, consistency, humility, a willingness to grow. She told me that men often think women want someone who has it all figured out. But that's not true, she said. We just want someone who's willing to figure it out with us. That's when I realized so much of what makes a man wise, admirable, magnetic has nothing to do with how much he earns or how many people follow him. It has everything to do with how he shows up when no one's watching, how he treats people when there's nothing to gain, how he carries himself when life doesn't go according to plan. Elsie told me about a moment when she and her husband had nothing but each other. The business he worked for had closed. The bills were piling up. They were sharing one can of soup between them at dinner, but she said, "Those nights he held my hand like we were rich, like nothing outside could touch what we had between us." And then she looked at me with that same spark in her eyes and said, "That's when I knew I was loved." Love, she said, isn't built in the grand gestures. It's built in the quiet, faithful ones, the ones that say, "I see you," even when life is falling apart. As we got near the end of our conversation, I asked her if she had any regrets. She thought for a long time and then said, "Only that I didn't speak up sooner when I saw the men I loved hiding parts of themselves. I should have told them it was okay to be tired, okay to be unsure, okay to need someone."